This is Beyond Perception, where it's all about breaking out of limited perception and waking up to our creative genius, our human potential, our true self. I am Simon Rilling, and it's a great pleasure to be here today with John Head. At the early age of 8, John had a very unusual experience, which led him to inner knowing and to follow a spiritual path later on. Next to a decades-long career as a software developer, business analyst, and sales, he always thought outside the box and was a researcher by heart. His journey led him not only to study and practice martial arts for 25 years, he holds 2 black belts and is an instructor himself, but also to work as a medium, frequency researcher, and healing facilitator with a very unique set of experience and expertise. John has searched for an answer to the question, how can I serve, for over 4 decades, and is dedicated to helping others be successful in life and business. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, as just said, you have this really interesting curriculum. On the one side, you followed the, in quotes, normal professional route, being a sales consultant and speaker, but then you also have this other part in your life, which is very unusual or even unknown for most people. You are a frequency healer and medium. Was there a specific point in time where you realized that you might have a different path than others?
I think it was probably when I was young and I kept getting information. I didn't really know what it meant to get information. And I got into an argument with my parents about a National Geographic article about the way the pyramids were built. No matter what they said, I just knew they were wrong. And I didn't know how I knew, but I knew they were wrong. And that sort of set me on this path when I would get right people and I'd hear things to tell them. And probably wasn't until my 20s where I really started doing deep meditation and I got a little more of a handle on it. And meditation sort of got me connected.
Sorry for that. You just broke up the last part
Okay.
of it. A deeper meditation when you were around 20 years and
Yeah, so when I began deep meditation at 20 through transcendental and also through martial arts, it's Tai Chi is a standing moving meditation. And I learned about how the energy flew through my body when I did such forms. And it became very poignant for me to sense things. And part of the martial arts training was learning to perceive your person's movements before they happened. And there was a point where I could begin sparring and I'd say, you're fixing to throw a jab. And I would say that, and they would go, how'd you know? Well, don't know. And so it made me my best. I was number 2 in the entire state, my first time doing it. And it was because I could feel what they were doing and I could feel when they backed off, and that's when I'd attack. So it's this ebb and flow in martial arts that you try to balance. There's a technique called push hands where you stand essentially arm's length apart from the other person and you try to push them over with your eyes closed. And the object is to block them, push. When you have an advantage, when you not have an advantage. And then you could eventually over time feel where your body was open for an attack, because you could feel your aura was not protecting you. And then the other aspect of that in martial arts is that we'd bring up our chi, rubbing your hands together. And you can start to feel that force when you get your hands really hot doing that. That's what we learn to work with to help heal ourselves. Or wrist hurt. Grandmaster would come up to us, rub his hands real hot, put it on there. And we felt like we had an iron on our hands. It was so hot. And your skin would turn immediately bright red. And he goes, no, this is the way we always fix stuff. And so I did that from 19 on. And so over the years of trying to understand energy from an analytical point of view, energy can't really be analyzed. It can be quantified, which means we can measure it. But I think energy is beyond the perception of the mind. It's more of an experiential thing. And so, in a lot of the thoughts, they say if you're thinking, you're not present. By being present, you can't have a thought. You have to be sort of open and receptive versus when it means now what happened, not what's happening, because I'm analyzing something from the past. So I couldn't experience what was there. So that was part of martial arts is being present. And when you're present with energy, you can start to feel it move. And that's when you really start finding the grace in energy. Because it's so easy to work with. It's just people don't understand how to sense it, per se. That makes sense?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There are a couple of questions. So when you had the first thing you mentioned, you had this argument or like this example of an argument with your parents about pyramids, and you had this inner knowing that what they were telling you was wrong. Was it just the knowing that it was wrong or not correct, or did you actually receive arguments to counter their arguments or explain them about the the way it's supposed to be, or was it just this inner knowing? If that makes sense.
Well, the National Geographic article had them using rollers. They used logs and they rolled them and pushed them up and all this sort of stuff. And I just knew that wasn't right. Just did not feel right. I said, that's not right. That's not right. I said, what do you mean? I even remember I was by the sycamore tree talking to them about it. I brought the article out. Look, this is wrong. This is wrong. And they go, well, why do you say that? I went, I don't know, but I know that's wrong. And my parents were not connected in that way. So I had a little bit of a challenge childhood-wise with them. Where do you come up with this? You're so imaginative. So.
Yeah, and I know that you also had this experience, which blew my mind, and I would love you to, if you want to, guide the listeners through what I think it happened at the age of 8, a very unusual experience, which.
Oh yeah.
Then,
well, let me give a little background. So I grew up in the country. So we're on a couple of acres. We have some cows. We have a kennel with 26 dogs, and we have chickens because we like fresh eggs. Who doesn't, right? And the chicken coop was probably 10 by 10, but it was a high ceiling. It was something you could walk into. And we must have had 15 chickens, and we're in the middle of a huge storm in East Texas. Lots of rain, lots of wind, and we hear the chickens just going crazy. And they're probably 100 yards from us. For us to hear them over a storm meant something was serious. So they sent me down there, being a young kid, put on my little yellow there, and I looked, and they've got 2 little cage areas that they work in. And I was in the first one. The building is off to my side, and I'm looking to see what's going on underneath them. And I see a big bright flash of light. And then the next thing I remember is waking up inside on the back wall of the chicken coop, pulling myself up out of the dirt. And I'm going, what? I'm walking myself up against the wall and going, what? How did I get in here? I didn't have a clue. So the chickens are fine. They're all inside the coop now. And I go upstairs and say, man, that was interesting. And they go, well, where have you been? What do you mean, where have I been? I've been in the chicken coop. I said, you've been gone 45 minutes. Where did you go? What? 45 minutes? You've got to be kidding. I just got back. No, you've been gone 45 minutes. And sure enough, 45. I still don't remember anything of what happened at that time, but I don't know if that was got hit by lightning, if I got abducted by aliens, if I had some sort of initiation by angels, but my perception definitely changed. And that's when the pyramid event or the dialogue on the National Geographic came after that event. I was probably 9 or 10 when I had that discussion on the pyramids.
And since then, you would receive information or have an inner understanding or inner knowing about things or information which you really could not have received on other ways, but just having downloads in
Yeah,
a
I can,
sense.
when I hug people sometimes, I can tell their time of death if they're close. And so I've had, now that I'm getting older, it's becoming a little more of an inconvenience than a, whereas I go, oh man, it's going to be the last time I'm going to see this guy. And I ask, am I supposed to share that? And the answer is no, most 90% of the time. And I just said, how you feeling sometimes? And I've had it happen 5 times in the last 3 years. So it's a different experience, but I'm okay with it.
And this happened when you were 8. So really at a young age. How did it impact you? Or I would assume that my parents would not really believe if I were to
Nope.
explain like what's happening,
Yeah,
what's
they didn't have a
going on.
clue.
Like they would probably like think, no, like don't make this
Well,
up.
they
Yeah.
just had to have a vivid imagination.
So
You're very creative. You have a very big imagination.
Mhm. But for you, it was clear that this is true and that it is there, and it's not just insanity.
Well, I didn't know. I mean, there was a point in my life where I go, where, so here's a little backstory to help understand
Hmm.
sort of the framework that I work in. There's all kinds of clairaudient, claircognizant, clairvoyant, clear, whatever, right? In the English
Hmm.
language, that's the way they
Hmm.
describe it. And you hear, you see, you know. And so there was a lady back in the 80s named Barbara Brennan. She wrote a book called
Hmm.
Hands of Light. I
Hmm.
highly recommend it. It's a great book.
Hmm.
Hands of Light, Barbara Brennan. And that book, she teaches how to see the auras, how to interpret the auras, how to manipulate the auras for healing. And it was a week-long course. And when I went to the course, by the end of the week, I couldn't see anything. And so our test for our certification invited locals to join us on stage that had known conditions. They asked us to scan the aura and give her a reading. Tell us what's wrong with them. And I got up there and went, I don't see anything. He said, what do you mean you don't see anything? Do you see the red around her kidneys, this and that? I said, no. He says, well, can you tell what's wrong with her? And then I just ran off the list. And she goes, oh, well, you didn't need to take the class. You're claircognizant. Your information just comes in as knowing. And that's the first time I'd ever heard it framed that way, because I can hear things.
Hmm.
And when I'm working with energy, I'll hear it to tell me, press harder, hold it longer, move it up, move it down, whatever, if I'm working on a stuck part of someone's body. But I can now do that all remote too, because now I've learned to work with energy without separation of distance, because energy is not care about distance or time. It can be manipulated pretty much. Getting that claircognizant result from that instructor was what sort of allowed me to accept my information more readily.
Hmm.
And that happened when I was about 35 or 38. And then I started channeling at 40.
Okay, like for example, from my wife's experience, I know that when she was small, she would recollect, share that in her past life, she was a big man, but nobody would
Yeah.
believe her. And so, in a sense, like if that were true, but you start doubting your senses, like it's a generalization, and you, in a sense, you're receiving conditioning to not trust your senses or information beyond your 5 senses, right? For most
Yep.
people. So, um, thank you very much for sharing this. And so then you started studying martial arts, like also like healing practices
At
from.
19,
Mhm.
and I had an instructor for about, what's that?
I was just saying,
What
so
was your question?
you started practicing martial arts, but then also learning healing practices, right?
Yeah. So my first instructor said, if you know how to hurt, you have to know how to heal.
Hmm. Hmm.
He says you can't do one without the other. This is not martial arts is not about hurting people. Martial arts is a way of life. It's a mindset. You always try to embarrass them before you try to hurt them. You you make them miss. You throw them on the ground. You do whatever you can do, but you don't ever try to hurt anybody, right? And if you do hurt somebody, you go over there and you fix them. And so, for 10 years, that was just, if you know how to hurt, you have to know how to heal. And so they gave us lots of books on just about the meridians and all that, which what I've discovered in my path, now this is not necessarily for everybody else, is that I had to let go of my intelligence, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do and listen to what I'm asked to do.
Okay.
That was a huge shift for me because I'd studied all these shiatsu techniques and I'm going, okay, so they're stuck here. This feels like a compressed muscle. So what I have to do is I have to release around the area and this and that. And I went to take a Reiki course to help learn more about how to work with energy from a formal point of view. And I went to the class and I said, well, I've been working with energy for, like 15, 20 years. And I just thought I should get certified because that gives you rights in the States to work on. It's not considered energy work. And I got that certification to make sure I was safe in the states I was doing my work in. The thing that I found sort of interesting is when I did the work on the instructor, she goes, well, let me look at you. And she goes, wow, you're actually good enough to be a master, and I'm just going to sign you at a level 3 master. You can go home. And I said, but teach me something. She goes, well, instead of trying to fix energy, why don't you transmute it? Because I was shamanic in my early practice, where I'd take energy and rip it out and send it to the light, and I'd do all this sort of work. And they got to say, you don't have to. It wants to go. Of course, it wouldn't be up on top begging for attention if it wasn't ready to transmute or transform. So all pain, even my martial arts instructor said, because it wouldn't be noticed if you didn't have the pain. You don't have to get to the pain to release energies. But if you don't, then you now start having physical ailments. You can even have an accident sometimes to help your body stop, so you'll pay attention to what needs to be worked on.
Interesting. And one of the questions I have is is it human nature to be sensitive to energy and access those abilities, or do what you're doing? Is that part of human nature? Is
Yes,
it just that?
it's an inherent capability. So I can teach energy work to any things of that nature, and it's how to perceive the energy and then how to work with it. Because if you go clearly enough, you can actually ask an ailment, what is its message for me? If you can get to where you're not in the experiential mode, but you're in the observant mode, you can actually communicate with the energies in your body and the illnesses in your body and find out why they're there and what's their message. And once you discover that message, they tend to transmute and move on.
So there's an underlying message below each illness or disease. Would you say that?
My philosophy believes that source or God, or however you want to frame it, is a, and you have to choose our path, but our souls made an agreement before we came in to allow us to learn things. And these lessons are perhaps physical, emotional, mental, whatever the case may be, or even spiritual. You feel lost, you feel lack of connection with source. that connection is inherent in all of us, but our learned self has sort of taken over a little bit of our consciousness and our frameworks, because a baby is looking around the room. You notice babies always look around rooms because they're seeing stuff. They're still awake, right? And it's what we teach them and what our parents teach us. Why are you thinking that? That's crazy. Don't think that, right? And so you, as an adult, and go, no, no, no. I want to be childlike again in my observational skills. I don't want to sit here and somebody said, if you can look at a person and not put any sort of framing around them, they're big, they're tall, they're young, they're smart, they're this, they're that, you'll actually start to see their soul. Because when you start putting the fencing around them, you can't see the expansiveness of their true self.
Would you say that, like what you said before, is that we enter into certain contracts before we come to this experience as human? So would you say that that interests me very much, that our whole life is laid out? Like, is there still a free will then?
Oh, yes. So here we're here to learn things, right? This is, in my opinion, this environment is a learning experience, just like school, right? I believe we're energetic beings in a physical form. We're not physical beings trying to connect outside, right? The physical form is very dense and very hard to manipulate, compared to like in a dream. If you do lucid dreaming, you can go anywhere, anytime. You can fly in your dreams. You can do anything. Same thing in a meditation. You can visualize anything. When we come to the physical world, it's a lot more concrete. And because it's concrete, we tend to think it's more real than over there. There's a great book called Proof of Heaven by a doctor named Dr. Evan Alexander. He's a brain surgeon.
Okay.
And he doubted near the effect of all the drugs that they're under when they're in surgery and all the drugs that they have to take to get them anesthetized. You're just having hallucinations. You didn't see the tunnel of light. You didn't see all that stuff. Well, he got E. coli of the spine and the brain and went into a coma for 7 days and woke up and went, it's more real over there than it is here. That felt more real. And so he tells this story, and it's a beautiful story. And the one thing that caught my attention, is probably the most poignant thing that I've ever learned in a book, was he said, when I was aware, I was in muck. And I didn't like the muck. I complained about the muck. I hated the muck. I could do anything to get out of the muck. And the more he thought about it, the more he stayed. But the minute he started let go of the muck and where he was and just started hold him up to heaven. He goes, wow. And then he looks around, he's in observation mode, not judging. Then he goes, I'm in heaven. Boom, back down to the muck. Because he had now made a judgment. So he's back down in the muck. And then he, of course, criticizes himself for being in the muck, perpetuates the muck syndrome. Eventually, he lets go of being upset with the muck, and they pull him back up again. And so that taught me that if you're not comfortable with where you are, you can't move. And so that's where our minds can get in the way of not finding the beauty in where we are. So when anything happens to me, I said, what else can this mean? What else could this mean? Because, shoot, something happened, I lost a bunch of money, whatever. And I went, what else could this mean? And then I go back and look, did I have an intuition event that I ignored? Because my mind goes, God, this sounds like a good deal. And I lost money on it, but I have the intuition to go, you're right. So here's an example, if you don't mind, of how my intuition taught me a lesson. So as I'm starting my RV trip, you want to get your RV in good shape. And I was looking at the tires. I go, I think I need to replace the tires. But hauling around a 30-foot trailer to a tire shop is not actually easy. And this is my first trailer. So I ignored it. So in West Texas, it's like 30 miles between exits. So I'm in West Texas heading towards New Mexico and Colorado to see my daughter. And I get a blowout. I might have wanted to buy some off-road insurance, but I just blew it off because I just wanted to get off the road. It blows out. It grabs a propane line, rips open the propane line, catches it on fire because the rim had locked up and it was producing sparks. And so I've got people pointing at my trailer as they're driving by. I look in my rearview mirror, I see flames coming out. Now, trailers are made of plastic, so they burn fast. And so I look up and I go, it's probably going to be 20 miles to an exit. What am I going to do? I look up, there's an exit right there. I pull off, there's a puddle. It splashes up on the propane line, douses the propane out. I pull off and there's a tire repair shop. So while I learned my lesson to listen to my intuition, they weren't brutal. And the universe taught me I can look at it as good or bad, right? I had a blowout, I tore up my propane line. It cost me, $1,500 to get everything fixed once it's all said and done. Or I can go, okay, I will listen better. And so that's sort of the way I see lessons arriving when we don't listen per se. And the lessons in life get very challenging. When accidents like that happen, you go, well, there's no reason for that to happen. Yeah, there is. It's just we don't have the ability necessary to see it at a given time.
So you're saying we agree to certain lessons or challenges, and then it's on us, the free choice, how we are dealing with those challenges, if we learn the lesson or not. Is that, does it make sense? Or
we get a hint of something we're supposed to do, a little thought, we go, oh, that's interesting. We might make a note in our journal or whatever, and then we don't pursue it. Then we'll see somebody doing what we thought about. We go, man, that looks fun. And we just keep doing it. Eventually, you're going to be stopped so you have time to do it if you don't give yourself the time. If it's something you're supposed to do, the universe will make it apparent what you're supposed to do.
And when you said before, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said something along the lines of, now I'm doing what I'm asked to do. I'm a vessel.
Mm-hmm.
Who is speaking to you? Is it like if you could give a name to it, or what are you following? It doesn't make sense, the question, or?
No, I mean, I think you're onto something here in the fact that how do we learn to listen? I think that's really the question you're asking here. And how do we know if it's from our mind or from our soul or our spirit or God or however we frame that, right? I think that so I had a very, very big challenge with that early on. And so I tried to find a way to validate my information. Because when I'm working on people, I'll get information and I go, is this something I'm making up or something that, is a movie that I'm remembering and I'm going, oh, this is exactly like a movie. So I started muscle testing or using kinesiology. And so I will use muscle testing to validate my answers.
Could you maybe just quickly explain what it is for those listeners who have no clue about it?
Yeah, so there's a science used by chiropractors a lot and a lot of other alternative health people called kinesiology. And there's a great book called Touch for Health where they can actually measure the strength of given muscles in isolation. And you can actually ask questions and get yes or no answers. We're all psychic in our own ability. It's just that we don't take the time to develop it. Mm-hmm. I think it's an inherent skill, but I don't think we focus on it too much to learn. So one of the things that I studied was kinesiology, which is muscle testing. There's some amazing videos on YouTube for muscle testing. Mm-hmm. And a good way to practice is find the muscle method that you want. And some people use the hand and they go, give me a yes, give me a no. Mm-hmm. And so you can say, yes, give me a no. And you don't try to, pinch a penny flatter than a sheet of paper. You're just simply holding a loose dime. You say, give me a yes, give me a no. Excuse me. And I practiced that a lot. And then I would practice on cards. There's a great book by a Dr. David Hawkins called Power versus Force.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That book is what started me really believing in kinesiology.
Okay.
He's an MD that studied it, mm-hmm. but then he found out it applies to everything. It's not just about validating if a muscle's good or whatever. He says if you frame your questions right, you can get an answer to anything. In fact, on the back of the book, one of his Power is from Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. Most influential book I've ever read. I went, huh. And so I've developed my muscle testing to where I do this. And I push down and say, give me a yes, give me a no. And then I converted it to this. So my daughter says, Dad, I have a question for the finger. And that's her thing said, I've got a question for the finger, Dad. And so she calls and said, give me a yes, give me a no. So what I do is I'll get a deck of cards. Is this card red or black? Oh, it's black. Okay, is it a face card or a number card? Oh, it's a number card. Is it between 1 and 5? No. It's between 5 and 6 and 10. Yes. Okay. Is it 7, 8, 9? Oh, it's a 9. That's the way I practice. And I just did that and did that and did that. I did it with photos and all kinds of stuff. Yes, it is about.
Yeah, it's
questions are important.
It's super, super interesting. And I mean, I assume that many listeners, for them, the term energy or maybe even energy healing or frequency healing is not something they're very much familiar with it. If you had to define or explain like frequency healing, like what would you say it is? How does it work?
Well, frequency is inherent in all things we can measure. Radio waves, sound waves, light waves, heartbeats, blood flows, everything has got a frequency to it. It's a wave, right? Up and down, yin and yang symbol, up and down, up and down. Important, but since everything has a frequency, there's two ways to deal with frequency. Have you ever seen that video of all the metronomes syncing over time? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's entrainment. And so that's the universe is saying, hey, if I put a frequency that's the right frequency, things will align to it and become more harmonious. So there's a principle in frequency healing is that you put harmonious frequencies into the body through various methods. And those can help an organ recover because it knows what it's supposed to do. It knows what its ideal state is. The other side of it is the killing frequencies, which are square waves. You know, comes up, crosses over, goes down, back out. Those are square waves. It's like a hammer. Mm-hmm. Those waves, named Days of Tesla. He was actually a friend of Tesla's. And his equipment was confiscated by the U.S. government at the same time Tesla's was.
We just lost you. I didn't understand the name. Tesla and?
Raymond Rife, Dr. Rife, R-I-F-E.
Dr. Rife, yes.
Yep. So back in the 30s, you could not see bacteria in a live state because you had to use so much ultraviolet light to see it because they're really small and transparent. It would actually kill the bacteria. So Tesla and Rife came up with an idea. I think it's mostly Rife with Tesla supporting him, to manipulate light to be able to see the bacteria in a living state with a lot less UV light. And he succeeded. And that telescope is still being produced today by a company in Germany. It's about a $30,000 telescope where you can manipulate the bacteria. It had its own light frequency. But what he discovered is when he would be tuning the light, sometimes the bacteria would burst. You ever seen a wine glass burst?
Yes.
See the sound?
Yeah.
That's the inharmonious frequency to the wine glass. Same thing with cells in bacteria, is that frequency can make the bacteria destroy itself. So Raymond discovered this, and he spent years. He'd sometimes sit in front of the microscope for 24, 30 hours trying to find the right frequency to kill cancer, because cancer was a thing back in the 30s even. So he worked with Stanford and Stanford Medical Hospital, and he cured either 68 or 86% of the cancer patients they presented to him that were terminal in 6 weeks. And he said, that's not right. It should have been 100% of my. Raymond Rife believes bacteria is our cause of illness, not viruses. Because it was Pasteur and Beauchamp back in the days of that time. Beauchamp was a bacteria guy, and Pasteur was viruses and vaccines. And we only have 23,000 DNA in our human bodies. A water flea has 31,000. So how are we so complex, right? The fact that we have 4 million DNA in our gut. So I started looking at how that all is affected, because you can detox your body with frequencies by killing bacteria that's known to be disruptive to the body using Rife equipment or other frequency-based equipment. You can change your diet and realign your gut. There's a study, to be honest, because the bacteria has been linked to Parkinson's.
We just lost you. There's a study.
Yeah, there's a study. So I go onto a site called Science Direct, and you can search microdata or biodata and Parkinson's. You can search on microdata, I think it's called, or gut data. And they're finding research of people who have very specific guts tend to have Parkinson's, and people with Alzheimer's have very specific bacteria in their gut. And they're trying to figure out what causes that. And you can clear some of that bacteria through frequency healing and different foods, bringing other foods back into your system.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, because this is really interesting. Would it make sense to say that each organ, each body part works optimally at a certain frequency, and that is health? And if it fluctuates or like diverts from this optimum frequency, this causes disease or manifests as disease. And frequency healing is about reestablishing that optimum frequency. Would that make sense to have this as an?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So frequency healing is about aligning the body to its optimal health, right? If your boots are stuck in mud, you can't walk very far. And that's the detox of the body. You've got to get rid of the toxins in the body, like mercury and, all the various chemicals. You've got to detox your body to give the immune system the ability to if it's fighting a problem. It's like your house or your car doesn't have any brakes, but you're parked on a hill. You've got to do a lot of stuff when you get out of your car to make sure it doesn't roll down the hill. Same thing with toxins. For your body to operate efficiently, you got a box of toxins. Your body's putting in all these supports to keep it from going downhill. Same sort of thing. If we can get rid of those toxins, the parking brake starts to work.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that there are two sources of changing our frequency to work optimally? It's either internally, probably stress, so maybe negative thoughts, whatever, but also from the outside, our environment, lifestyle. You mentioned toxins, maybe also radiation.
Yes.
And I mean, the one big question, obvious question, I assume, is if frequency healing is that powerful and works, and I'm also really curious about probably hearing some transformations or results. And you mentioned Rife before. When you nowadays Google him, you will not find too much of an information.
You'll get both sides.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, you will find information such as the claims that he apparently had succeeded in curing cancer, but then that this work is suppressed by conspiracies, and skeptics would probably say, like, if it were that powerful, why it's not applied
money
really on a wide range.
Medicine in the US is about money. It's about, if we cure these problems, the medical industry do with itself. It wouldn't have anything to do, right? Here's a great story from my grandmaster. So my last instructor actually lived in a temple in South Korea for 25 years. Buddhist monk, the real deal, and he knocked me over from 6 feet away using just chi, which taught me a lot. I'll tell that story in a minute. Remind me.
Wow.
But he said, if I go to make herbs, and he says, when we make an herb to cure somebody, we take the herb that has the effect. Well, we add sometimes 3 to 6 more herbs to counteract the side effects of it. He said, but American medicine will find the healing thing and use it only in their drug. They'll synthesize it and put it in their drug and call it, here's the cure for whatever. And he said, the drug, understand what true health is. They look at symptoms, not causes, right? They want to fix the symptom. So they're not saying, well, God, if we balance the kidney meridians and the kidney balance, that will help with the bladder issues that they have. And if they increase their lung capacity, their kidneys will have more oxygen to operate. And, Chinese medicine looks at the body as a whole, where Western medicine tends to look at symptoms. And so that's where the big disconnect is in medicine right now, in my opinion, is the fact that they're treating symptoms and not looking at the underlying causes. Because we all know, you get super stressed, you can put your body into a heart attack, right? And if you don't support your body properly, like I did this last week, I dehydrated this last week. I ended myself to the emergency room because I couldn't get my pulse rate down under 135. And I was sitting still. And it's normally 70 sitting still. I went, okay, I need to go get this checked out. I was so dehydrated, they could barely get any blood out of me. But, okay. Right? But, I had 3 days of realizing I was dehydrated, but I didn't do anything about it because I wasn't thirsty. So my lesson became bigger and bigger until I did something. Then they gave me an IV, and all of a sudden my pulse rate came right down. They said, dude, you're just dehydrated as all get out. They had to use normally you use the IVs and they put the little vacuum tubes on there. Blood comes right out. They actually get a hypodermic to pull it out because it wouldn't flow out. I went, no wonder I'm in a mess. So, but I didn't about being dehydrated.
Yeah, good luck. I'm happy to hear that you're well and that everything worked out fine.
Well, it was a good lesson too, because I was sort of going, I'm enjoying life, but if I stay or I go, I'm fine. I've had a good life. At my age, you start thinking those things. And the universe gives me this little lesson. It said, well, you can go. We'll set it up so you can go. Are you ready to go? And so I started writing I modified my last will and testament and all this sort of stuff.
You
And they
did.
go, are you sure? They went, no. I said, good. And, and then next thing I know, I got the pulse rate up. I tried to call my friends, take me to the hospital. And I called the ER. They put an IV in me immediately. And I was good to go. They let me go in an hour.
Hmm. That's incredible.
I
And
thought I
frequency healing, I'm still intrigued. How does it work? Are these machines and they are penetrating you with a certain frequency, and by that change the frequency your body is resonating with, or are there just like very different modalities? Or
Well, that's a good question. Um, so, what is frequency? Everything is a frequency. You've walked into a cathedral and felt just awesome, right? If you ever sat under a pyramid, you can actually just put your hand inside and out the pyramid and feel the difference when you're aligned up and aware.
so I read that you build a pyramid yourself at home. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. I
And
built an 8-foot copper grid based on the size of the pyramid. I put crystals in every corner of the copper wire grid, and I lay down in it. I started channeling immediately.
and yeah, that's incredible. And are you the only person who experienced that within your pyramid, or is that also something other people could or
Oh yeah.
have experienced too?
Well, I had a couple friend of mine come to visit me in Austin, and I usually run my businesses out of my house. I don't have a lot of visiting space. I said, look, you're welcome to come visit, but you're going to have to sleep under a pyramid. And they went, okay, we'll do it. So I had some nice futon stuff, and I put EMF cloth all around the pyramid. And the guy that was not a woo-woo guy, as I'll call him, was like, really? You don't have a bed? I said, no, this is what I got, dude. I said, I think you'll be fine. And they slept for I said, that's just a pyramid, and it's aligned to the grid, and I'm blocking EMF from you so you can sit in a totally energy-free environment. And he says, man, I feel great. So it's available to anybody. I mean, all you have to do is build a pyramid, and that I copper pipes, and then I essentially solder some joints together, an elbow joint, a cap, and then I created 4 caps, and I put a D-ring in the middle for the top, and I put in there. And, you can build it any size you want. You can use PVC pipe. It doesn't have to be copper. Copper was cheaper back then. So I built an 8-foot. I've got a little 3-foot too. I travel.
And then what is it that happens? Is the structure of the pyramid like concentrating the energy at a point which is there anyway, or how can we understand that?
Well, there. Probably the best way to frame this is that sacred geometry is part of our inherent process, right? The flower of life and all those sort of things. Pyramids are part of sacred geometry, right? They're simply, it's the diamond shape. There's 3-sided pyramids, tetrahedrons, and there's 4-sided pyramids and all that kind of stuff. Their Merkaba meditation taught by Drunvalo Melchizedek is a sacred geometry meditation that's pretty powerful. Supposedly the Merkaba is the vehicle of light to transform you from one dimension to another. That through the Merkaba and through my channeling. But everything has a frequency. I mean, even my eye here has a frequency, and my phone, everything has a frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use sound to permeate a space and create a different environment. You play a lot of heavy metal, you know, and you walk into a room that's had a lot of heavy metal played, you can feel it, versus somebody that's been doing ohm for an hour. You know, you walk into that space, it feels a totally different environment. The book that sort of taught me about everything that we experience has a frequency, and the book is The Secret Life of Plants. And so, The Secret Life of Plants, they actually put ultra sensitive ohm meters on plants. And then they have one person come into one room and they cut leaves on a plant. They're playing heavy metal over here. They're playing classical Mozart over here. And I'll get my hand back in the frame. And when the guy that did the cutting walked into this room, the plants reacted. They went, how do they know? And the person that comes over here and cared for the plants and loved on them, they reacted as well. But the waveform was a lot smoother versus the guy that, you know, cut the plants. That waveform was just like fear. And so our thoughts create fear, our thoughts create harmony. And so that's where our perceptions come in. How do we see things? What else could this mean? You know, find the silver lining in the dark cloud. Once you find the silver lining, the dark cloud can move on, right? Once you bring light to a dark, right? Because we forget in physics that light permeates everything and dark is the absence of light. It's not its own entity, right? Same thing with hot and cold. Cold is the absence of heat. Once you introduce heat, it's no longer absolute zero. So it's the same thing in our thoughts. Once we bring that light to a dark cloud that's happening in our life, finding what else it can mean, that allows the energy to start moving again. So the frequencies of music that we play in our house, I know a amazing psychic out of Salt Lake City. She plays ohm 24/7 on her internal speaker systems, very faintly, just has it playing all the time. And when I walked into her house, I could feel it.
Yeah, super fascinating. And
Spiritual, some shamanic music, some spiritual music, some meditation music. There's a great group out of Boston called Sacred Acoustics.
mm-hmm.
And they produced, remember the Evan Alexander Proof of Heaven book I mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
His partner is the founder of Sacred Acoustics. They're actually trying to design music that puts you in the same state he was in when he saw the other side.
Mm-hmm.
That's is to produce that kind of music so you can go put it on, listen to it, and be transported to the other side. And they have some stuff that actually made me forget where my body was and scared me. I got so disconnected from my body, I couldn't find the edges. I couldn't find it. And I was going for that. So they've got some really good stuff. I highly recommend them.
Thank you very much for the resources. We will add them to the show notes. So you said, I know, like, because you mentioned it before when we had a talk or when I was part of your webinar last year, that there is also a Rife machine, like a healing machine, or there are machines which you can use to generate certain frequencies to treat disease. You mentioned also sound waves.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is ill, and like how can you find something like that? Where can people get to know more about these modalities? Are there studies with patients being treated with those frequency modalities, or is it more something which is?
Well, let me give you another to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Rife equipment has been redesigned and repurposed by many manufacturers. Okay. Mm-hmm. Some of them charge $15,000 for a machine and it's not portable, right? But it's got all these inert gases and this Tesla coil, and it does some amazing stuff. However, I found a company out of China called Spooky2, the number 2.com. And they also have testimonials. Spooky2.com. They've got testimonials up there, and they got before and after MRIs on their testimonial page showing tumors gone in 6 weeks. Before and after MRIs. You got lots of testimonials from all over the world. The challenge with Spooky, I'm working to become a certified trainer in it, is there's DC to run, and the software, as a software designer, is not ideal. It's a very deep tool, very complicated tool, and they open it up for all the Spooky2 company was founded by all the people that felt that health is a right of living, not a privilege of class or of finances. And getting the best health is very hard to do in a lot of environments. So you can buy a basic Spooky2 piece of equipment for $300 that you can put to a PC and heal your body. It's really that simple. Their lowest piece of equipment is $100. And then there's a guy named Tennant who does a lot of really good stuff and has a piece of equipment that does similar to that, but they qualify equipment. Little silver conductive gloves, so you can just use gloves instead of stickers. They sell the gloves for $150 a piece. Spooky sells 2 gloves, 2 elbows, 2 knees, and 2 feet for $38. Exact same product. So they believe, they said, look, we don't offer discounts, we don't offer coupons, hardly ever, because we're about selling it at the lowest possible price. And I use their equipment almost exclusively now, so does all my other Rife equipment. They've got a very diverse set. They've got cold lasers for skin conditions. They've got contacts by electrical. So let me go into frequency healing a little bit more from the Rife perspective. You have what you call as the carrier wave. The carrier wave is what the body. You can
Sorry, we just
sound,
lost you after the carrier wave.
Okay. So the carrier wave is what introduces the healing or the destructive frequency into the body. I can use sound, and you can play stuff over speakers through an audio thing. You can use electrical, like you would, just a little TENS pad. If you got those little muscle stimulators for pain, you can use those. They've got plasma, they've got scalar, they've got laser, they've got magnetic, and then they also have remote or quantum entanglement. So you can actually use your DNA to work on you while you're not even connected to the machine. And they're one of the few people that uses that technology. And that's actually how they came up with the name, or design's word for quantum entanglement. He says it's spooky the way that it works. I don't understand it. And that was part of it. And so I did work using someone's fingernails from Hawaii, and I ran a detox program on it. And when I turned it on, they're sensitive. They go, "Did you just turn it on?" I'm on the phone with them. I went, "I did. I can feel it." So it's sort of interesting the way that it all works.
Absolutely. And what kind of transformation have you witnessed with people you're working with or you have been working with using those modalities?
Well, so I started using the Spooky Rife equipment about 2 years ago. And I have one working lung. I lost a lung the way it worked. But that put me on this healing course that's taught me about Rife.
Sorry,
It
we
was
just
purposeful.
lost you again. You lost a lung, and
Yeah, so I
then
lost use of a lung.
yeah.
So I have only one working lung, 48% lung capacity.
Mm-hmm.
That put me on this healing path to take control of my body because nobody could help me.
Mm-hmm.
And I started using Rife equipment. When I started using Rife equipment, when I go visit my daughter in Denver, which is at a mile high, right, 5,200 feet high, I could not go for more than 20 minutes without getting oxygen and using it, just because there's so much less air there, only one lung. I'm already at 50%. It's another 40% less oxygen there. I couldn't keep up. After using Rife equipment, 6,000 need oxygen, except when I slept. Now I'm sitting at 4,000 feet. I don't need oxygen. I can go to Denver. I don't need oxygen. And that's just in 2 years. And I don't know why I'm so much more better at breathing than I was. There's no logic. My lung capacity is the same. Nothing's changed physically, but energetically, my body can do it better. Until I dehydrate, but that's all that story. But that changed me.
Yeah.
And so that's one I can say personally. And then I had a gentleman who shattered his knee that needed 14 screws and whatever. And we've been using bone healing frequencies on him. And according to his doctor, he's 2 weeks out of schedule. So it was sort of surprising that he achieved that.
So the reason basically that it's not really used or not very widespread is that there is no money in it because the machine itself is pretty cheap. And if you're using it, you don't really need something else, and you're fixing the problem because you're looking at the cause and not just treating the symptom.
Yes. So they actually have a biofeedback system built into the Spooky Rife where you can actually run all the frequencies, and if your body reacts, it records it. And then it runs those frequencies because there's resistance, which means there's a block. So it can sense that block. And so then you run those frequencies on your body until those blocks get removed. So it's a very, very robust piece of equipment that significant. And I've had people with Lyme's disease not have any relapses after using Rife equipment. There's a guy that's allergic to mold that did a bread experiment. He put bread in a Petri dish and let it go moldy. He ran a plasma no mold to get rid of mold in the house. That bread had no mold for 2 weeks. Then it came back. He ran the protocol again. The mold went away. And 2 weeks later, it came back. So when you run frequencies, they permeate, right? Everything we think permeates everything else. That's why our thoughts are so important. That's why our foods are so important. Quality of our waters, because there are inherent frequencies in that. And just like, who was telling me that? So I'm working with a CBD company here in the US. Mm-hmm. And when he interviewed me, the first thing he asked me, he said, I was, okay, then we can talk because you get what I'm doing. I'm not just creating plants. I'm supporting them from the seed all the way to the processing as a entity, not as an object. And so I talk to the plants. I play music for the plants. I do all these things because I let them know they're going to help someone heal. And so he says, my compounds are more robust than the other compounds that we've seen tested on the market. He says, I don't know what I'm doing different, but I'm just treating the plant with more respect.
That's beautiful. For those skeptic people out there, you mentioned a page before to look up studies, but is there something to educate yourself and to maybe look into some studies? I assume it is not FDA approved, right? Because
No, it's not an FDA approved device. So they have arrested doctors using RIFE equipment in their practice. But on a personal note, you can use it on yourself with no repercussions, right? I cannot attach leads to somebody legally to do a RIFE treatment. So what I do is I set up their equipment and I set up their protocols and I send them the files and tell them where to put them on their computer and say, this is your protocol for repairing your knee. This is the protocol for, supporting your sleep habits. There's another protocol for your dream state. Yeah, right? And then I just program them, give them so they can load them into their computer as an editor. Program 30 programs into that for someone, send them the device. That's where I think the technology is going to go, because then you don't even have to do a computer. You just pick protocol 1 through 30. And that makes it very easy to use. Because that's really the problem with the spooky equipment, is that it is not intuitively usable. You've got to understand it. And I'm actually going to be working on some videos to teach people how to use spooky equipment. But I've been very impressed with what it's done for me. That's why I'm so excited about it.
Yeah.
Looks like you're broken up a little bit.
Yes, we're back. It is fascinating when we would have had this conversation 2 years ago, I would have said like, no way, this just doesn't make any sense.
Stay away, you crazy person.
But I can admit I'm a little bit more open-minded, and that's also something I'm really curious about, to hear your perspective, because that's something you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation too, that how to phrase it, most people on this planet, they are locked into this 5 sense perception of life.
Yep.
And if you're within this perception, you're not witnessing anything beyond those 5 senses. So if someone comes to tell you something which doesn't fit that perspective, you cannot grasp it. And one of the questions I wanted to speak with you, or to hear your take on it. First of all, why do you think we're all locked into this very narrow perspective on life, and there are not so many people who are starting to break out of that? Like, and then the other question would be, what can we do to develop our intuition, to break out of this 5 sense prison, in a sense? And this is my own journey too. I mean, if you talk, like you also gave this example before, like rubbing your hands and then feeling the energy. Mm-hmm. When I did this 1 year ago, 2 years ago, like I didn't feel anything, and I just thought this is like a bogus thing. There's nothing to be felt. Like otherwise, I would feel it. I don't feel anything. So like, but then also, I would have been very curious to experience and like, but there was no plan. Like nobody was telling me, like, just do this, and then at some point you can experience it. So I felt a little bit lost, and having no clue if this is true or not, because I didn't experience. Like people next to me stand there and they said, yeah, I can feel the energy. And I was like, is this just an imagination? Is this placebo? Is this like, if you believe it, you feel it?
All of the above, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, it is for everybody. Everybody has their own experience. It's all unique, right? So when you're asking about, perceiving and how do we help other people find their path, right? I'm going to go back to the story where my grand master knocked me over from 6 feet away. He says, I'm going to teach you how to do this. And so, and I'm a senior student at the time, and I'm in my 50s at this point. And pulling up the chi from the earth, and I'm creating a big ball, and I'm throwing it at him, and all this kind of great stuff, and the guy's not moving. He goes, it's not moving. He goes, and he lets me embarrass myself for almost 25 minutes up there trying to knock this over. And there are other people doing it. I'm in this one line and it ain't moving. Everybody else's line is moving. I'm just not in the line to move. And he goes, you Westerners, just you think you have to get in front of everything and confront it. He goes, no. It's about creating space for it to move. He goes, move the energy out from behind him. Don't try to push him down. Move the energy from behind him and he'll fall into it. I go, very gently, just go, ah. I just sees her like I do this with clouds. I try to play with clouds, see if I can get them to disperse. And I just move the energy out from behind him and he falls right down the first time. He goes, it's not about you. All you can do is create a space for them to move into. That makes sense?
It's something to think about. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean, because if you're trying to get your partner or something to shift, if you come at it from an intellectual point of view, their mind gets engaged, right? Mm-hmm. If you come at it from a right versus wrong, judgment gets engaged, right? And so, they say lead by example, right? And so the space between the thoughts is probably the most important thing you can find. That came through interestingly. So they had me say that one. So if our minds are engaged, right? I mean, the Bible says, judge not lest you be judged, right? Mm-hmm. And if we're thinking, we're judging, right? We're in our mind. We're not present with source or God or energetics. We're in the mode, right? And then, I'm happy to do a meditation that we can record another time that you can share, not as a podcast per se, but whatever. I'll work with you and we can do that I think will help you feel more energies. And there are ways to, so in Tai Chi, in my first class, we learned iron palm in martial arts and iron to hit things and not feel it. I went, well, how do you do that? How do you teach your hand not to break when you hit concrete as hard as you can with the flat palm? And he says, well, just do it. So you go through these 49 days of hand training exercises and using these ointments to condition your hands. And I only did one hand because I didn't know what it was going to do. Thought it'd build calluses and all that stuff. Didn't do any of that. But I got to where I could nail into the end of a 2x4 a nail with my palm. And I didn't feel it. I could get on a piece of concrete. I could hit my hand down as hard as I can, would not even feel it. And we're just going, wow, what the fudge? And so it comes with, you're teaching your body to bring up the chi to the surface, because you can use your chi to communicate with people. I used to do something in a meeting where I'd see a silver thread running around everyone's crown chakras. I just create this loop. The meeting was all discordant. I just create a little loop of the silver thread and just circle it. And the meeting would calm down, everybody start communicating. So we're all connected, and we can actually find those threads and do a cord cutting exercise of any thread that doesn't belong to our pathway right now. It's a fairly simple process, and I'm happy to share it if you want. Don't know if it's appropriate for this talk or not, but I'm happy to share it. Or we can do it another time. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, this conversation is amazing. And I think there's enough to explore in a second conversation if you're up to that.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
on the other hand, I also want to be respectful of your time because I think we're talking already for quite a bit. So
Yeah. No worries. I talk a bit when I get into this space. I
yeah,
studied it a long time.
it is incredible, interesting, both personally, but but also think for people listening to this and potentially having not yet an experience with those topics. What would be a recommendation for someone who wants to start feeling energy or even experiencing this inner stillness, as you just described, this absence of thought, no judgment? Do you have something which?
Well, the mind likes to be in exploration. So I suggest a meditation that requires the mind to be engaged, right? Sort of counting your breath,
Mhm.
right? Breathing in, breathing out. Um, I've also used mantras, words that make no sense. I don't like having words that make sense.
Mhm.
For a mantra for somebody that's a mentalist type of person that's always in their mind, because it gives them something to analyze. If I
Mhm.
give you a word like non-disca, non-disca, you go, what is that? Your brain, and then all of a sudden you're just saying the word, right? You don't care, right? But you try to figure it out for a while, and then you don't care, and then all of a sudden you're not thinking of the mantra anymore, and you're having these thoughts, and the problem is those are old thoughts rolling off. That's what meditation does, is it allows the thoughts that are no longer right. Just like I like the meditation, right? And then there are meditations where you can actually put your feet on the earth and find roots and put roots into the earth and try to feel connected to the earth. And then I bring energy in through the crown and have a meet at my heart and light a fire. The two come in to light a fire of love in my heart. So meditation is really a very good way.
Mhm.
You might look at moving meditation as well, like Tai Chi. It's very, because for people that need that, they need to think about what the form is, but eventually the form becomes its own thing. You don't think about it anymore. I think meditation is the best approach, one that has something for the mind to focus on.
Super cool. Well, thank you, John. Is there something you want to share with the listeners? Something you're working on? Any projects, a message, whatever it is?
I am working on producing some meditations to help
Mhm.
people transition from one part of their life of that thread cutting
Mhm.
exercise that I talk about.
Mhm.
I'm looking to get that onto a format for consumption versus direct conversation.
Mhm.
And I'm working on some music modeling based on sacred geometry to produce the waveforms for the background.
Is that something the listeners might be able to find on your webpage, which we add to the show notes?
I have not put it up there yet, but I have put some information up there. I am going to work on. I've written some short things I published on Amazon as part of a leader's book called "What's Your Story." I'm going to be
Mhm.
posting that stuff up there here fairly soon, and I've got another one called "Mine" that I'm working on.
Mhm.
Remember, I saw a 2-year-old go "Mine," and I went, "Wow, this permeates our life." That mine, that's mine, right? Because I'm now going through a phase of life where I'm talking about what do I own, right? What am I anchoring myself to? What's important to me? And at one point, it was possessions, right? I had the big house, I had this, I had that. Then the universe made me take this RV path. And I told the universe, I said, look, help me, guide me, show me the way. And I turned my free will over to source, make me your servant in this lifetime. How can I serve others? That I know offered you a 2-year lease, but I need you to move out outside to sell the property. The next day from that ceremony where I turned my free will over to Source, I was going to stay there for 2 years. And he goes, nope, you're moving. So I looked for a property for 8 months, couldn't find a property, deals fell through. So I put it out to the universe and used a technique from remote viewing to get the universe to have a bunch of people on the internet give me answers. I had 15 pieces of abstract art, and I posted a forum and said, pick the art you think that represents me. And of course, it's abstract stuff. It's not anything pretty, just, modern art. And I assigned an answer to every one of those that no one could see. And the art that they picked was 87% RV and mobile. Don't own a home right now. And I went, fine. So RV, I got it at half price because somebody wanted out. So it was a very good deal. And it's actually a pretty amazing space. I've got a jewelry station. I've got a ride station. I've got an EMF-free room. Fun.
That sounds really incredible. And yeah, I really want to thank you for
a little bit.
I really want to thank you for taking the time, sharing your experience, your wisdom with all of us. And yeah, I'm completely up to support you in your commitment to serving and helping more people. And this is also what this podcast is about, to share helpful, empowering information to break out of limited perception. And it is a true honor to travel together. And I hope, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation already. Thank you, John.
Thank you.